Welcome. It is the LawyerFair podcast. It is blowing a hoolie outside. I believe it's called Imogen, but Imogen at the moment is battering my windows at the office here in Battersea. But it is time for another quick podcast, and we are chatting today. It's the first of our legal service podcasts today, and we are chatting with a fine guest, a chap called Chris Bull. Chris is a writer, speaker, advisor on innovation in the digital age across professional service firms, but particularly relating to legal service firms. And I picked up on an article that Chris wrote about the minimum technology skills required of a lawyer in 2016 and wanted to use that really as a platform to discuss the reality on the ground and whether there is a technology gap between lawyer and business owner and entrepreneur. So without further ado, I think we should let Warren take it away.
Send lawyers guns and money. Hey! Send lawyers guns and money.
In the eye of the beholder, Chris.
Okay, that could take a while then.
It could take a while, but Polly's
Get there in the end.
Polly's very, very diplomatic about how she fades in. But listen, I suspect she'll have faded in by now. So Chris, welcome. Great to speak to you.
Good to be here, Andrew.
And obviously, I've done a little preamble before we've started chatting for those who are listening about your background. But just give us a little bit more of where you've come from, and in particular, your interest in legal services.
Yeah, I've been working in legal services for 20 years now. In fact, and I utterly admit not being a lawyer, having trained as an accountant and worked with PwC and Ernst & Young, and indeed more recently with KPMG, I kind of fell into it. I ended up responding to a job ad for a finance director in a law firm in the mid-90s, knowing very little about law firms, having worked in financial services for the first part of my career. But it was in the right place at the right time, looked like it might be interesting. And I ended up working for that firm called Osborne Clarke for 12 years in a variety of guises: chief operating officer, chief executive. I had a great time as the firm grew really quickly, and was really responsible as part of a usually 3-person management team for how the firm operated. And I was very lucky. We started from a relatively small base and grew very quickly, which gave us lots of pressures, but also forced us to take lots of decisions about efficiency, the way we ran the firm, to move quickly. And the other thing that was very, very fortunate, I think, in terms of being in that firm at that time, was the firm grew largely probably on the back of a .com technology practice and a cutting edge private equity practice. So the kind of people we were working for and dealing with were people who were pushing the envelope of technology, who were creating a market that we all now know and love, but at the time in the late 90s was all very new in the modern internet-based technology market. And the firm wanted to reflect that client base and wanted to do things that were a little bit more like those businesses in the way it operated and the way it used technology. So that was a great start for me, and it's kept me very interested for 12 years. I then spent 2.5 years running the onshore US and UK components of an outsourcing company called Integrian, who focused on the legal market and professional services. And since then, 5 years now, actually, I've been doing a variety of things as a management consultant, advisor, writing, presenting, and latterly more of my work is as a retained advisor. So short part-time roles in terms of the amount of time I spend each week, but over a longer period helping law firms, legal service businesses, other people in the market to develop their operations and strategies. So it's been a really interesting history in that respect, and all the time, right the way through that, technology has been something that, as a non-technologist, I've had to grapple with, understand, and work out how to deploy.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, and I know you are writing considerably and keynote speaker. I noticed a keynote speaker in Amsterdam in a couple of months. I was seeing actually internally at LawyerFair whether I could wriggle a bit of expense account to go to Amsterdam for that one. But you're covering there. I mean, that's a really fascinating seminar, isn't it? I know there's issues about various technology subjects being covered there. What are you discussing at LEXPO, Chris?
Yeah, it's a new event actually, although from a quite well established stable and a magazine called Legal IT Today, which has been around for a while. So LEXPO, yeah, Amsterdam, 21st of April, and I was asked to come along and speak about fundamentally the technology competence and capability of lawyers today, and the impact that has on their firms' efficiency, profitability, but particularly the client's response to that. And there's been some really interesting developments in amongst large corporate clients for legal services in terms of them trying to lift the lid on what's happening inside the firms that they're paying and who are working for them, and understand whether those law firms are doing things and delivering their work to the same kind of efficiency standard that those corporate clients would expect and that they demand internally. And the answer you won't be entirely surprised to find from those corporations who've done that is no. The law firms and the lawyers working for them specifically are not as capable at using technology, often quite simple applications and functions, as the client would expect.
Well, no, Chris, I was only going to interject because we've kind of you very smoothly moved us into the key topic that we were going to discuss on this podcast, and I was prompted to chat with you online by an article that you wrote that said the minimum technology skills required of a lawyer. Now, technology skills and lawyer are phrases that are not often close bedfellows, as you know, and you've already alluded to in that. And I was also interested in going back to Legal IT Today, actually. There was an article by Matt Torrens sometime last year. I haven't actually got a date over here, but there was a very interesting paragraph there from Matt that was referring to the fact that various bodies, the SRA and the Law Society, etc., provide authoritative guidance and they promote the highest professional standards, etc. But somewhere, and he didn't actually specify which of them, in fairness, but he says one of them says for securely disposing of a hard drive, one of them suggests removing the hard drive from the computer and hitting it repeatedly with a heavy hammer. Which I thought was a lovely thing to include. But look, what's the reality on the ground? I mean, because a lot of business owners listen to these podcasts, and I think their experience, which you've already alluded to, is that there is a large technology gap between most law firms, not all, but most law firms and the entrepreneur. But what's the reality from your perspective in 2016?
Yeah, that was also a nice segue, Andrew, into the caveats. So let's just start with the caveats. I think all of the observations that I make and other people have made in this area are inevitably generalizations. There are far too many lawyers out in private practice and in-house to know exactly who does what. And some of them clearly, from what we see and read and the people I meet, are extremely capable. So we understand that. Second point, which I think has to be made, is law firms and lawyers are not alone in struggling to keep up with the pace of technology.
Indeed.
And the functionality of the tools they've got available to them. And I think that is true across almost every sector, and small businesses. And many of the people listening may absolutely identify with this. Often find that perhaps more than others. They don't have the IT support, the training support necessarily available in their businesses. They don't have much time. They reach out for their new devices and new applications and using cloud systems and so on as efficiency tools, and hopefully find that that's exactly what they are, but still recognize that they never really quite have time to get on top of them. So I think that's a common issue. Third caveat is there's been some really interesting work on this, but no one, there is no definitive study which says, lawyers are this far behind the standard that clients would expect or within their firms. So lots of caveats, but there is some interesting work. The major couple of things that have been done in this area, an in-house lawyer, so working for a corporate client of law firms in the US, in fact, at Kia Motors, US, a guy called Casey Flaherty, famously about three or 4 years ago, started to develop an audit for the lawyers who were working for him in a range of law firms. And Kia Motors US, big corporate business, buyer of legal services, and Casey, who actually is another speaker at LEXPO, so it'd be great to, I think, for the first time actually, to be on a platform with Casey, given his expertise in this area. So he put this audit together. He spent, I think, 30 minutes working his way through this audit, which was how to format a document and autofill some sections of a document, derive the right information from a fairly simple spreadsheet. It wasn't particularly complex stuff. And what he was trying to get at with this was, are the lawyers that I'm instructing and generally paying by the hour efficient as I would like them to be, and are they able to do these fairly simple technology tasks in the right amount of time? Because if they're not, I suspect I'm paying them for their relative incompetence. He completed it in 30 minutes. The average time that the lawyers he gave completed it in was 5 hours, and that was the average. That was the median amount of time. He gave it to 9 firms, big firms with decent IT and training, etc. All 9 firms failed the test as far as he was concerned. And actually, with the results of that, he I think one firm in the end would actually disinstructed. So they were, and that's partly because they didn't respond with any kind of positive reaction to his audit. But the other firms all had to take a discount on their fees. He basically said, look, I think there's inefficiency here, which means I pay more because you haven't managed to get your lawyers up to the standard that I would expect. Basic, 2012, 2013, when he ran this audit, competence in simple IT. And so he's done more work on that, and he's working with one of the US law schools and has developed that audit quite a lot further. And at the same time, an organization who actually is primarily made up of the law firms, some in-house people in there as well, called LTC4, which people can look up on ltc4.org, has come into being, which has pulled together and is a not-for-profit and shared information around, well, what are the core competences a lawyer should have in today's market, and they've started to offer certifications for lawyers and for support staff that I think are really helping firms, and it's prevalent in the US, but it's coming more and more into the UK as well, to set their standards and understand, well, we need to get people to this benchmark. But the evidence is strongly from those organizations and those efforts, but also I think from most of our subjective assessment of the people we work with and talk to in the legal market, that it is behind where it should be. And we're talking about relatively simple business technology tasks that can be completed at a desk. And I'll go on, I'm sure, to mention something about what happens when you're not at the desk. But this is, when you're at your desk, surrounded by all the support that you've got, and with your 9 to 5 services available to you, good broadband connection, all those things, people still are not at the level they should be at.
Well, it's fascinating. I try, Chris, with these podcasts, and I think I've been successful in pretty much all of the previous 102, not to refer too much to myself or to my own business at LawyerFair. However, what I would say, that although that stuff is fascinating, and one of the things that we find that business owners particularly connect with us is that we provide that filter for them. So, for example, the inefficiencies of certain firms, not all, as you say, there are lots of firms out there providing a really great service, but there are there's a perception probably more than the reality, in fairness, from business owners that it is an inefficient market. But one of the areas of value that we get feedback on all the time is the fact that because we filter and we monitor and we actually create that efficiency by the expectations of our service, that they view that as a real high value add service over and above price competition or other factors, but the ability to actually almost corral lawyers into becoming more efficient via a platform like ours. So that feeds in very much to what you're saying. And I think the other great uncertainty for business owners in purchasing legal services is the uncertainty of value. And I think all of these things, efficiency, certifications, the ability for them just to use basic, decent IT systems to deliver a sharper, more efficient service. These are value issues, and I always think that firms. I think actually it'd be interesting to ask you this question because we've found at LawyerFair that there's been some really, really lots of great feedback, but I call them the young Turks. There are certain people within firms who are really up for it, really up for the new age of legal services, but they're slowed down by the committee or by the older members. I mean, with Osborne Clarke, I mean, did you have and other firms that you perhaps worked with, did you find it quite a challenge to turn the entire QE2 around in the direction you wanted it to?
I'm gonna sort of. I think I'll move on from Osborne Clarke specifically.
That's fair.
Not only because it's 7 years
Yes.
since I was in Osborne Clarke, and I've already said some very good things about the way that firm developed. But of course, you and I know what's happened in the last 7 years is another step in the transformation of the way we all live and work in terms of use of technology.
Indeed.
So the bar has in some ways become higher. In other ways, it's made a little easier. And again, some of the people listening to this will recognize this in that the tools we have available are, I think, more intuitive. And that's great. So in some sense, this barrier between lawyers and gap between lawyers and some other sectors may be able to be narrowed a little bit just because we're now using iPhones, smartphones, apps, tools that actually are quite straightforward to use, and that's becoming more prevalent. So there's a kind of a ray of sunshine there. I think you're absolutely right though to link it to value. And the other thing, which is also a keynote in your business, is transparency. Trying to give the business owners who are buying legal services and looking for their next legal supplier much more transparency about what those firms do, how they charge, how they work. And if you think about the Flaherty audits and the renewed focus on this area, it is trying to get under the skin of how firms actually work. Mm-hmm. And as you say, push them to say, well, people are now looking at this. We're now reporting on this. We now include this in our reviews of your firm. Therefore, these accreditations and commitments and evidence that you can provide about how you work in an efficient way and how competent your lawyers are in this area are important. And similarly, price and value is critical. It's where a lot of this push from clients has emanated, of course, which is, I think Flaherty says this in his early work. In a way, his outcome isn't purely that private practice lawyers will become more technologically competent. That's one very important thing, but he feels it surfacing this issue was an attempt to shift firms faster towards alternative ways of charging. There is a very close link between this issue around the technology private practice lawyers, the law firms have, and how competent their people are, and the broader issues in the market that I know you're dealing with and picking away at constantly, which is about value and pricing and transparency. So this is helping to expose, reveal how firms actually work, how the pricing is put together, what value you're getting as a client, potential client of a law firm. and in many ways is by bringing this kind of issue to the surface, whether firms who charge by the hour are charging in part for lack of competence in technology, is adding to the drive and push to use alternative ways of pricing, what are often called alternative fee arrangements. So move away where possible from the billable hour, charging for time. And this is yet another plank in many ways in the argument that should be the direction of travel.
Well, the billable hour is a whole new podcast, Chris, which I'm going to get you on in the future. But listen, I'm going to conclude with two things. First of all, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out. And there's a couple of points I want to raise here. There was a Gartner study that showed that 10% of legal services in 2015, 10% of legal services were in the cloud, and that was going to become 90% in 2018. I just wonder whether you thought that was realistic. And also just linked to that, whether the EU regulation, is it a combination of regulation and market that's going to achieve that shift? And the other very quick thing, Chris, to conclude with this is really how you see in 10 years' time, if you have a view on that, on how businesses and lawyers will interact. I mean, we can all get our Richard Susskind book out, but what's your view? How do you think it will shift?
Let's start there and work backwards. I think the point you asked about, is it regulation or is it the market, is really interesting. And of course, there's always going to be a blend of all of those things. I think most people who've worked a lot in the legal sector and with law firms will always say the thing that drives change in lawyers and law firms most of all is what the client demands. And the clients asking for some change in pricing, change in efficiency is always going to drive behavior most. And I think and then we have to strip back and say, well, why would clients expect some kind of change? And I think that's the broader technology, economy, societal change that comes around the digital revolution and the digital age. It is in many ways nothing to do with the legal sector, the changes we're seeing now, and nothing specific about the legal sector. It is catching up and being impacted by the changes we see in every other sector and have already seen in many sectors in terms of, more services being delivered through the internet and remotely, less expectation, and in many ways less tolerance for consumers and buyers. But I've got to go into an office somewhere to get hold of a service, and it's got to be on in their hours, on their terms. Actually, I might want this right here and now from my sofa, or while I'm on the move. And I think people are questioning already, and will continue to do so, why legal services would be any different. Yeah. There will always be some things, as there are in other markets, where you and I and everybody else listening would expect to go and see a human being who's going to talk to us face to face, and certain things that we'll say, I'll pay a premium for that. This is really important to me. I don't want to take a risk on a service from somebody I've never met before, or I don't know. I'm going to pay a premium. But the key thing to me is what I often refer to as the death of difference. The legal market looks very different, and has looked very different in the way it works to most other markets and most other things we buy. And that is shifting. To take an example, somebody pointed out to me recently that if you look at conveyancing, key piece of legal work for many individuals, key plank of revenue and profitability for some law firms. And that has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years in terms of technology being introduced into it. But you're now in a position where buying and selling a house involves lots of different people, estate agents, banks, and almost every link on that chain now is highly technology enabled. You only have to look at the ads on TV to see just just how much is now done through the internet and so on. And yet, when it drops into the lawyer, typically something kind of falls off, and the wheels fall off slightly, and you're back into having to sign things manually and send a paper document and possibly go into an office to meet somebody. And whilst there are exceptions to that, this a really interesting example of an end-to-end transactional process that is almost entirely enabled now by technology for the person going through it, except where it comes to the legal bit. And that's the driver that will change us towards 90% of work done in a way which is cloud or internet, but certainly much more digital. And by when, who knows? Everybody in the legal world knows that making date predictions is a mug's game. So I like Richard Susskind has learned this, I think, over the years. He now says, well, I don't know whether it's going to be 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. Everything goes a bit more slowly, but we are not in control of it from within the legal sector.
Yep.
It is something that is increasingly in the hands of the customer.
Yep. Well, I in terms of legal futurism, are a bit of novice to you and others, but I always think that the worst case scenario and the best case, it's almost always somewhere in the middle, isn't it? There's always going to be a need for good quality lawyers, in my view. I don't buy completely into the Susskind argument that it'll all be completely digital. There will always be a need, but it'll be a very different way of delivering and accessing that legal service in the future. I do like your phrase, by the way, death of difference. I've written that down. Now, Chris, I'm going to conclude. We have a little section at the end of our podcast that is called Magic Moments.
Magic moments, memories we've been sharing. Magic moments, when two hearts are caring.
I'm going to give you my magic moment, actually, to give you a little bit of a breathing space here as you quickly jot down your own thoughts. So yesterday, swimming pool, young 2-year-old daughter, taking her to the swimming pool prior to yesterday, was the most exhausting and exacting and stressful experience. I mean, if I can paint a picture, she would literally cling on to any piece of passing person, anything, a locker, to stop herself going in the pool. And yesterday, it was like a sea change. Now, what we do at home and what we do at work are completely linked, particularly if you're working for yourself or you're driving your own business. And therefore, that was such a pleasurable experience yesterday that I romped into work this morning feeling on cloud nine. So that was my personal magic moment. But Chris, give us yours.
Yeah, I'll resist the temptation to respond in kind and remember the date when we used to have to throw my daughter into the pool to start her swimming. Okay, slightly sporting related, and so keeping on a theme. 3 years ago, I started far too late in life, to be honest, running, and it was my former PA actually at Osprey Luxe, who's now working their marketing team, whose son had tragically died of leukemia at age 7, and she'd been fundraising incredibly hard and decided that she'd try and get a team together for this 10K run in Bristol. And I madly said, yes, I'd do it, because I thought it was a great thing to do and keen to do it with her and some other colleagues. And so I did my first 10K 3 years ago. And thanks to both of them, really, I've carried on. And I can't say I enjoy it, but I can't say I have constant stream of magic moments. In fact, I was out on Saturday in the wind and rain from start to finish of just over an hour's run, lashing at me and thinking, why am I doing this? But I kept up with it, and I'm now almost finished my challenge, which is to do 50 different 10K or slightly longer runs.
Wow.
Before I'm 50, so I set that 6 months before I was due to be 50. I am now on 46 runs, and I've got 4 more to go. Carefully choosing. Might well be doing one today because my 50th birthday is looming. So I think I'll just make it, and we're doing some fundraising for that charity as well. And I have to say, I actually do really enjoy the time out running.
Brilliant.
I'd like to say it gives me thinking time. You know what? It wipes your brain. You can't
Yeah.
really go and think about work, and I relish that bit of time out.
Well, it's important. It's important. And without giving us specific dates, I mean, how far away are we from number 50?
We are. I should know exactly. I think we're 10 days,
Oh, wow. Right.
10 or 11 days. Yeah,
Oh,
four
well.
runs
Well, good luck. Well, listen,
in
Chris,
11 days.
a brilliant podcast. Really enjoyed it. Fascinating stuff. We put lots of links on the webpage about where to find you, but kingsmeadsquare.com is where you're based, obviously on LinkedIn, and LEXPO, LEXPO.com is the event on the 21st of April in Amsterdam. I know that Chrissy Lightfoot's there as well, isn't she, talking about AI? So fascinating panel. Chris, thanks a lot. Have a great week.
Thanks, Andrew.
Be in touch. Thanks,
All the
Chris.
best.
Chris, actually, if you hang on for a second, we're
will.
going to have a quick off-the-record chat that the listeners are not going to be privy to. But thank you very much for listening, everybody. And the next podcast is due out in a couple of days.